We're here with Andrew Welch. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us here at Whole Village.
Pleasure.
Andrew Welch is a multi-talented speaker, theater director, educator, town crier, and disaster management leader, as well as being an author of 2 books. Your most recent book is called Arch Second Chance.
Yeah.
Just came out this year. So we're here to talk about that. So it's a sequel to your first book, which is called The Value Crisis. So maybe we should start with that book. That probably makes sense.
Yeah.
So in The Value Crisis, you're kind of arguing that the world is not in a great state. We've got some problems to sort out.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why you came to that conclusion. Everything seems fine to me. I don't know.
Yeah. I came to that conclusion because I was discovering just some crises in my own life, really. And it was a crisis of belief in a sense that I grew up, I studied mathematics, and I grew up with this concept that numbers were rational and objective, and that if we could just rely on numbers, everything would be solved. I mean, the whole world went through this. The scientific revolution sort of came to this conclusion as well. And what I found was that some of the things that I was deciding and choosing were not making rational numeric sense. And all humans are guilty of that. We can't assess risk. We can't properly process numbers. We're not wired that way. We're wired with other values. And I thought, what's going on here? And I started to write about those other values that weren't measured by number. And I started to realize that not only was the conflict between these values responsible for some of the odd things that were going on in my life, but in fact, you could extend that outwards and it could explain a whole lot of things that were going on in the planet. Climate emergency, biodiversity loss, social inequity, all of these things that we consider now to be the greatest challenges ultimately came down to a crisis of values for me. And the values were these 2 kinds of values that were measured by number, where more is always worth more. Votes are number-based. Likes, Facebook likes. Every time you have 5 likes, if you can get 10, that's a bigger hit, right? Mm-hmm. So it's worth more. Whereas there are a lot of values that we have in our human lives that are not based on numbers. I sat down before this and I tried to make a list of what those values might be, just to give myself here's a short list. Respect, appreciation, empathy, friendship, diversity, well-being, compassion, happiness, spirituality, physiological needs like food, sleep, oxygen, intimacy, heat, the environment, creativity, relationships, love, honor, awe, beauty, justice, culture, health, morality, wisdom, freedom, integrity, duty, fairness, and faith. They're not just values that can't be measured by number, but they are all values that don't have that property of more is always worth more. You look at some of those things. Food is not always worth more. There's a concept of sufficiency over which it's worth less. You try and cram yourself in. I think you could even say that faith and morality are things that have a level of sufficiency in some ways, if you could measure it, beyond which it's no longer giving you a payback. Everything in nature works by a sufficiency and a feedback loop. Numbers are the only things that don't.
Yeah, I love this way of framing things, and I find it so interesting. I'm curious, why do you think that human-based values, so qualitative values like you listed, love, honor, all these things, have been so trumped, so dominated by number-based values? I mean, it seems like all of these are so appealing. Why don't we focus on these?
No, absolutely. That's a good question, because it's not that these values no longer are recognized. Everybody recognizes these as values. I go down the list. Oh yeah, I like culture, I like well-being, I like compassion and happiness and so on. But a number of factors have come into play that force number-based values to take precedence. Some of the things I kind of theorized in the first book was that it's easier to make decisions based on numbers. If you want to try and remove yourself from the equation, you think, well, the same way I did when I was trying to be rational. I thought, I'll let numbers make the decision for me, because I thought that my human foibles were getting in the way of rational, clear thought. And I know that the human brain does not make rational decisions all the time. We are subject to all kinds of biases and so on. We're really bad at anchoring our risk management to real facts and so on. And overall, humanity has, I don't think it's a mistake. I think we had to go through that arc of relying on numbers more, because the whole Renaissance was based on this idea. Scientific thought is based on the idea that we're not going to just come up with goofy ideas that Aristotle had, or that religion might put down on us to say that this is better than that, and no, this religion says that's better than that. We're going to rely on science and things that you can measure. And science and technology took off because of that, because we were able to say, no, we're going to rely on measurements as opposed to other things. The problem is when you start letting that happen in our world of economics and the way we make global decisions, national decisions, because suddenly numbers were taking precedence, were trumping. And we also have, just as an added bonus, this concept now into our society of a species, and I do call it a species, called corporations, that do not have the counterbalancing value forces. They are only based, when I talk about publicly traded business corporations, are only based on numbers. And the more power they get, the more they decide what values we're going to use. So that's how it kind of happened.
Yeah, I found the chapter on corporations to be very interesting, and you had a very interesting idea that I never thought about, but you argued that there's no such thing as corporate greed.
That's right.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, I can. If you were to graph values, remember I was saying that all these human values like food and sleep and so on have a peak. They have a sufficiency after which that's declining value. If you stayed in bed for 28 hours, that would be bad, right? And so we have this concept in human-based values of sufficiency. Number-based values don't have that concept because more is always worth more. So they just go on like that. So if you have a corporation that's based on this kind of value set, there's no such thing as greed, because greed is defined as an excess. And in order to have an excess, which is all this stuff down here, you need to have a point at which you've reached your maximum. Corporations don't have that point. Who's to say what is excessive for Amazon to earn? Amazon's executives, Amazon's owners, different matter, because we do know how much a human needs to live. But a corporation, every corporation has different needs. And so there's no such thing as an excessive greed. That's a human value being imposed on an object that doesn't have that concept.
Right. So
right.
Coming from a place of endless growth.
Absolutely. What happens when a corporation gets to that point is it grows more so that it needs more, and it keeps on going.
So do you think that the problem lies with capitalism then? Is capitalism salvageable? Is ethical capitalism possible? Can we reform it?
Oh, absolutely.
No,
capitalism is that the solving this is what the second book ended up being all about. So I would talk about the concepts being brought up in The Value Crisis, which is the first book. And people would say, okay, I think I get it now. I think I understand what you're talking about. There's this versus that, and I see how that can apply in my life, but I don't know what to do now. And so I thought, okay, I should start looking for solutions to this. One of the things I look at in the second book is capitalism, and I list the positive things about capitalism. The way that capitalism allows us to do things that individual humans or individual groups, partnerships can't do. The way it pools resources, the way it limits liability and so on. And then I list all the problems with capitalism. And when you look at the two lists, you can easily have the first without the second. Corporations, for example, they're trying to solve that now. There's a concept called B corporations, which are corporations set up for benefit of society and mankind. And when you write that into the definition of what the corporation's all about, it works. You can define sufficiency. You can measure yourself against missions as opposed to the balance sheet. We've defined corporations to be the red line. And because of that, we can change that. It's not just on a piece of paper. We could change the definition of the way corporations work. And capitalism is back in the out of the doghouse.
Yeah, I
You
like
will.
that idea of opening our imagination and saying, look, we're creating corporations, we can change how they work too. There's no reason we can't.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So you started talking about how the second book is all about solutions.
Yeah.
It's a great. There are many solutions in the book. There's kind of two types. So there's like you talk a lot about systemic changes that can happen to our economy, our politics, and things. And then there's also a lot of advice for people on what they can do individually. I really enjoyed that aspect. I was thinking we could maybe just talk about a couple of the large scale solutions before we dive into, what can any of us do as individuals. So for example, one of your main arguments is that we need a guaranteed basic income.
Well, let's roll it back 1 second, because
yeah.
we do have to wrestle with a particular conundrum, a catch-22, if you will, of value systems. And that is that, remember, I have to emphasize that these two different models of values are not, it's not that one is good and one is bad, okay? It's that one is taking precedence over the other, and we have to rebalance that. The problem is that people won't go to a different value system until they see the benefits of going to the different value system. And the catch-22 part is you will not see the benefits of organizing your life around this value system or better precedence there unless you're already there, because it's not valuable unless you've already adopted that value system. So again, I'm gonna roll back a bit, because we are going to come back to that. But I want to talk about, because when we talk about a basic income, we have to understand what we mean by wealth. All right, this is an important concept to cover first, and it's actually, there are three different kinds of wealth. All right, there is what we call virtual wealth. Virtual wealth is basically money. All right, it has no meaning outside of its belief system. So if I was stranded on a desert island and I had $14,000, I would starve. It's not going to do me any good. I can't eat the money. It's all in a belief system that the 14,000 could get me things I need. Okay. There is another belief or another value system over here, which is what I would call genuine wealth. And that's the things that we listed earlier. That's happiness, joy, justice, all of those human values that can't be quantified, can't be nailed down very easily, but we all recognize them as genuine happiness. Where they intersect is what I call real wealth. And that's the things like food and water. They're things that we need as humans, but they can also be measured by number. I can tell you how many hamburgers I have in the fridge, or how many liters of water I've got. And the really interesting part comes from trying to graph these over time. So what happens to virtual wealth when we graph it over time? What tends to happen in our modern economy is that it isn't just that $15 is always $15 and it retains its value. Actually, under our current economy, it often goes up, because we have investments, we have interest, we have all these ways of making wealth worth more. And in fact, if you happen to be a member of the higher income bracket in the population, you will earn money faster. That's the way virtual wealth works. Your money will increase faster than other people's because you have access to advice and financial planners and this kind of thing. So there's the graph. What happens when we graph real wealth? What happens to the value of food and cars and appliances over time? They actually tend to go down, right? You know, you got that car, it's running really well. Oh, and then the oil pan begins leaking. Oh, so you fix that, and then something else goes, and the alternator goes, and very quickly the car comes to a point where it's worth nothing, and you get rid of it, and you go for a new car. Same with food. Food will degrade over time. Metal will rust over time. This is the way the universe works, is right here. Here's our first crisis. Here's our first conflict. We are trading this for this.
So we're trading virtual
Dollars,
yeah.
virtual wealth for food and water.
Mm-hmm.
And we're claiming it's a fair transaction. But what happens to virtual wealth over time? It goes up. What happens to real wealth? It goes down because everything in the universe slowly degrades and decomposes. That's entropy. So you've got corporations out there and businesses that are trying to turn real wealth into virtual wealth as quickly as they can, because real wealth goes down over a while. Virtual wealth goes up. Now, the tricky part is how to graph joy, how to graph justice. All right. This was a conundrum. So let me take this actually, and I will get back to your question, basic income and so on. I want to go back to the whole village concept here, because when we tend to adopt a particular lifestyle or life plan or intentional living and so on, we tend to see some things as good and some things as bad. So we may say, if this was good and this was bad, we might put fossil fuels down here. We hate them. They're bad. We don't want them. We want to go with renewable energy. All right. And the problem with that is that that's based on one value system. Other value systems flip that round and they say, oh, no, no, no. According to the virtual wealth system, fossil fuels are great. And in fact, if I was to challenge you in this room to say, okay, who here can list all the great things about fossil fuels? Fossil fuels are awesome. They have propelled us into the 21st century. To think that a little bottle of gasoline can do what it does in an engine, and that's all we have to do is add that in, and it can do miraculous things for us. Fossil fuels produce plastic that are miracles for the things that it does. The problem is that there's a downside as well. So instead of looking at this as good and bad, what I do is I flip that on its side, and I say fossil fuels are over here, and renewable energy is over here. And for all the good things about fossil fuels, you know, it's a miracle. It produces plastics and all these things. That's great. And the bad things about fossil fuels are, of course, CO2 emissions and the terrible things it does to the environment and this kind of thing. Sure, there are bad things about fossil fuels. Renewable energy, it's sustainable. It's wonderful. Sun goes on forever. As far as we're concerned, it's forever. Good, great clean energy. What are the problems with renewable energy? Oh, I don't know. Change. It's awkward. Not as easy to use as fossil fuel. It's a lot of investment and invention and so on to solve all these things, get people converted over. So how do we graph that? Well, I would say that we graph that in this sense. Here is our society heading towards the miracle of fossil fuels. Now we're beginning to discover the downsides of fossil fuels. And so where we want to go is over here into sustainable, clean energy. Sooner or later, there's going to be downsides to that too. Downsides there's now. People that want to promote fossil fuels say, no, 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 you're forgetting about all these things down here. And it moves in this cycle. What it says is that there is a balance. We need a balance. Fossil fuels may not be a really good example. Let me take a more human value. This is where it gets even more bizarre. How would you graph justice? What's the great thing about justice? Well, justice, let's look at the problems of justice. If people are too unregulated, we'll call it unregulated down here, too much freedom. Actually, that'll be the pole over here, is unregulated. What do you end up with is anarchy. And when people are in anarchy, what do they demand? They demand more strict rules. We have to lay down some law and order and get society behaving. So over here is law and order. And we head up into this good living, I guess, people being obedient. What happens if you have too much law and order? Yeah, you get fascism, you get people trying to impose rules that go beyond the pale, if you were, and we start losing our freedom. So we say, no, we got to head over to here where there is more freedom. When you have more freedom, after a while, that starts leading to anarchy. So we go back into our root. These are cycles that anyone who is a biologist would recognize as a natural cycle. Even breathing in and out follows this. There's breathing in, there's breathing out. Do we ever have exactly the right amount of breath? No. It's a cycle. We have to breathe in. Oh, got too much carbon dioxide. We're now in the downside. We got to breathe out. Oh, not enough oxygen. Have a problem. Move over here. So we have this cycle. Now you were asking about basic income. All right. So one of the things that I wrestled with was, how do we get people to undergo these changes? How do we solve that catch-22 of you will never see the benefit of the other values until you've been able to adopt them? When I wrote the first book, I envisioned that it was going to be catastrophic. That the only way this was going to happen was that the values here, the virtual wealth and so on, had to collapse. That was the only way people were going to adopt something different. Something cataclysmic had to come on, what Naomi Klein would call the shock doctrine, right? There had to be some massive shock to the system. The carpet had to be pulled out from under us. Suddenly we go, oh my God, money's worth nothing. We don't know what to do anymore. Oh, maybe we should be adopting more human values. That was my belief. I finished the second book, March 2020, right when the pandemic hit. And then I realized maybe it didn't have to collapse. Maybe something else could come along that would change our idea of what was important, change our idea of what was possible and what wasn't. And one of the things that came along was, how do we disconnect the concept of money from survival? Because right now, one of the reasons that money is constantly trumping our human values is because we all need it to live. We can't get by without having money of some sort. We can go out and try and live on the land and so on, but after a while that gets pretty lonely. And even the people here that have a wonderful intentional way of living still need money. And so, and frankly, this is one community. There's a whole world out there, a whole planet of people that need money. How do we disconnect money from survival? And one of the things that happened in the pandemic was everybody was not working anymore. Suddenly, the income stopped. And what did the government do? They said, oh, this isn't good. We're going to give everybody money. We're going to call it a CERB, and we're going to make sure that people can still afford the food and to live and so on. One of my backgrounds is in disaster management, and that wasn't quite the way we used to do things in the Red Cross. When Fort McMurray had its big fire, we didn't say, did you work last year? What are your needs? Can you list how much money you have in the bank right now, and we'll decide how much you need? No, everybody got money. So then this idea of basic income came up. Now, basic income, you asked earlier, actually, universal basic income versus guaranteed basic income. Universal basic income, or a UBI, is this concept where everybody gets the same amount of money. Doesn't matter how much you already have. Everybody just gets a check from the government for a certain amount. A guaranteed basic income is that it's set at a level where you would be guaranteed to be earning that much money. And if the government is cutting a check for everyone, and it happens to also go to a CEO of a large corporation that doesn't need the money, they take it back. All right, so that's when it's guaranteed. It's not universal. There are proponents and people that argue it one way or the other. Anyway, the thing is, I made the discovery for myself that a basic income is not really something that you direct at solving poverty. It's something that you direct at taking society to the next level of evolution. Think about it for a minute. What would your life be like if you had a basic income? If the government said, what if you were above the line right now? Let's say that the government said you're going to get $2,000 a month guaranteed, and everyone in this room was earning more than $24,000, and you don't get it. Would it change your life? Absolutely. Because now you know if anything happens to you, you're not going to die. Margaret Mead was once asked, what's the earliest sign of civilization? Was it a shard of pottery or something like that? She said, no, to me, it's finding a femur that had healed. Because that, you back in antiquity and in anthropological times, if you broke your leg, you were dead. You couldn't forage, you couldn't hunt, you couldn't move with the rest of the tribe, you were dead. And to show that a broken leg had healed meant someone was taking care of you. Other people were looking after you. Survival was not threatened. And the basic income should do the same thing. So that even if you're earning a lot of money, you're not worried about your retirement because the money's going to be guaranteed. You're not worried about losing your job. You're not worried about being in a relationship that's abusive and you not being a wage earner and you can't go anywhere because you'd be out on the street, you'd be homeless because basic income would cover that. If you're an artist and you want to say, okay, I just want to produce paintings for a few years, I'm going to go with a basic income. And I can do that. I can actually pull that off. If you wanted to live intentionally here and not work for a while, you just wanted to pursue some other interests. You wanted to write a book. Writing a book is expensive. I'll tell you that right now. It's not just that you're not working. There's all kinds of costs, editors, and this kind of thing that come into play. You still have to eat. You still have to do things. And so this idea that money is disconnected from survival was really important. And what I ended up with was basic income is the first step to everything that I'm talking about.
Yeah, it makes sense because if you have that safety net, then you're more able to change your values in a way because you're no longer dependent on that money, on that job.
That's right.
In the same way. Yeah.
That's right. It's something which is apolitical, and in fact, basic income is spread across all the political parties, and they all have supporters for it as well as detractors. But one of the other things that's constant across all of the political parties is they all promise jobs. Everybody promises jobs, regardless of whether they're Greens or NDP or progressive conservative or liberals. They all say, oh yeah, we're going to produce jobs for you. Why? Because they know that jobs are the new survival basis that we live on. Everyone wants a job, except that everyone doesn't want a job. That's the joke. Nobody wants a job. Nobody, people want to do productive things with their lives. People want to be useful. They want to be occupied, but no one wants a job. And when I say a job, I mean that thing that means you have to go in and do things that are sometimes so awful, and maybe holding down 2 of them or 3 of them, or people in sweatshops in Asia going in and making thousands upon thousands of the latest fashion because it's a job, because without it, they don't survive. Nobody wants a job, and all the governments do is promise us jobs. And jobs are the #1 stumbling block between us moving from a society where we are run by corporations and consumerism and eating things versus the kind of intentional living you have here. Because frankly, if you look at it, if you look in deeply enough, jobs are only there to grow the economy, and the economy only grows to provide more jobs. At the end of the day, when you look at it, that's exactly what's happening. They need us to have jobs so we can buy the stuff they're producing, right? So basic income was, to me, that first step that goes across all political parties that we could say, I now think of money as something different. Nobody can live for very long on basic income. No one would choose to live on basic income. It's not going to buy you cell phone coverage. It's not going to buy you Netflix. It's not going to buy you that really nice winter coat you want. But it now means that you can tie the extra money that you're earning in jobs and productive things and things you want to do to things that have an immediate impact for you as a choice, things you'd like to have, and your survival's covered. All right, I've ranted long enough.
It's so interesting. I guess going back to the talk about COVID, I mean, it's very apt to see, there being a labor shortage. They can't get people to fill these terrible jobs, and maybe that's a sign that they're not paying properly, or the
pandemic was fascinating for a number of reasons, and among which I describe the COVID-19 pandemic as the ink that was flowing through the grooves we've already carved in society and making them visible. So all kinds of things, our new reliance on online shopping and our ability to work from home and our separations of social separations and what was important to us and what wasn't. This idea of who was essential, who had the essential jobs, the people that were the lowest paid, the garbage workers, the store clerks and so on. They were the essential workers. And so obviously you see the disconnect between money as a value, meaning they're valuable to us. No, they weren't valuable to us. We're going to pay them as little as we possibly get away with. And the people that are less valuable to us, they're the ones that are getting all the money. So all these disconnects became apparent, and all kinds of people started saying, wow, what's really important in my life? Geez, this is why the book is called Our Second Chance, because we've been given this opportunity to go, hey, maybe going into work at the rate that I was for the money that I was getting for the things that I was spending it on aren't really the important things. And the other really fascinating part for me was this. All right, let's take the same graph here and let's put the economy over here, and let's put health over here. We saw this on a daily basis with our governments, with the way they were making decisions. They were saying, oh, we need to support the economy. We have to get people out on the streets. We have to drop the mask protocols. We have to get gyms and restaurants opened. Whoa, another spike. All right, head over here to health. Shut everybody down. Let's get the masks on. Let's get the vaccinations going and so on. Oh, people are unhappy with that. Yeah, they don't like being locked in their apartment, and the businesses are going and struggling. We're going to try and go over here. This cycle was going on constantly, and it tells us that any government that spends all of its time over here measuring its success by gross domestic product and so on is not responding to the full picture. There's no solution as to one is better than the other. We have to have both. We can't have one, as you said, trumping the other one.
Right, and that ties into your overall argument that there's a loss of balance between those two sets of values.
Absolutely, there is.
That need to shift.
Not just in our governments, but in our own personal lives as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So are you saying that people need to personally change their values as well, or is it more about systemic change, or is it a bit of both?
Changing values is never going to happen because people are born with these values in them. Joy, the value of dollars is not going to go away either because it's just too convenient. It's a tool, and it's a marvelous tool for accomplishing what we want to do. The problem is when it stops being a tool and starts being the objective. That's when it becomes a problem. So you don't want to change your values. You just want to give recognition to the values that are already there. And one of the really neat things about this in an economic sense is I discovered that our economies don't have to be based on quantitative values. And in fact, they are not based solely on quantitative values. There is actually a spectrum. I could show you a neat picture on it, but it's going to be too technical. I'm just going to give you an example of what that spectrum might look like. What I've discovered is that a quantitative economy, which is based on dollars and cents, and a qualitative economy, which is based on human values, actually coexist. They exist right now. If you shop locally, you're still spending money, but you're developing a relationship with the local vendor and so on. They're probably selling you higher quality stuff because they know that you're going to be in the store again next week, and they don't want to be faced with the fact that they gave you crap or they gave you something that was inappropriate for you. Farmers markets have all these human values and so on associated with them. They're organic food grown conscientiously. You have a relationship with this person. You can bring your dog. You can experience meeting all of your friends and so on. People talk at farmers markets the way they don't in a grocery store. I don't know why. It's the same people. There's a lot of them are strangers still, but they interact in different ways. And yet it's still being based on dollars and so on. So there's this spectrum. I gave an example here. You want to buy a book. You want to get a book. What's the most quantitative way of getting it? Oh, you buy this book.
Buy that book.
I hesitate to reveal the most quantitative way of getting it is to steal it. That keeps your money and you get the book. All right. Buying a book online because it's cheap. Buying a book from a major chain store. Buying a book from a local independent shop. Borrowing a book from a library. Trading books with a friend. Receiving a book from a friend. Receiving a book from a friend with a personal note written inside. Receiving a book from a friend who wrote it, receiving a book from a friend who wrote it for you. Can you see how all of these things are on a spectrum that head towards this deeply human value, and we can place ourselves anywhere on that spectrum that we like?
Yes.
Buying locally is a qualitative value.
Yeah, it's a very interesting premise that it's a spectrum. It's not one or the other. I was very interested in what you wrote about the gift economy, and the gift economy is kind of a way to shift those transactions towards more human values, away from just purely money centric. Could you talk a little bit about what is a gift economy?
Well, a gift economy, a lot of people roll their eyes when it comes to talking about a gift economy, because a gift economy is something that was based on a much earlier time in civilization to a certain extent. That's where it started. And it was this idea that First Nations, I think, still have this to a certain extent. This concept of the people, the most powerful people in their society are the people that give the most away. That is their indication of power, not what you have, but what you give away. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of the things I really have to emphasize when you're looking at all of this stuff is that going to these values, these human values, should never be seen as a sacrifice. Remember that catch-22. When you shift value systems, you start to see the benefits under that new value system. A gift economy being based on this idea of giving more gifts gives you joy as well as giving the recipient joy. There is joy to giving something away. And the wonderful thing about that joy is the more you give away, the level of joy goes up. It goes up on both sides. So a gift economy is based on abundance, not on scarcity. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating little thing. And if you give stuff away, it will come back to you. If you form relationships, that will pay off big time. It actually leads to, how are we doing for time? I don't want to.
We're good.
We're good? Okay. I'd like to share something else about this concept of values in our own personal being. I want to talk right into the microphone there. And that's this concept that we actually have what I call 3 value personae operating within all of us, all at the same time. And the first is called the consumer value personae. That's the one that looks after our immediate needs. We all have that. We all need to consume. We are all living creatures. So at any given time, we have to consume food, oxygen, you name it. It's part of life. And when it comes to the economy, we love buying things at a low price. We love getting a deal. It's great. It feels good. Finding something on the sidewalk is that we can take and reuse is wonderful because we got it for nothing. On the other hand, we also have to realize that we can't always be thinking about just the present. We have to be thinking about the future. And this goes, again, way back in our evolution to the time when our earliest ancestors started putting food aside for a lean season, or started to collect things and store them for later, because there would be times when they didn't have same access to the stuff they wanted. The investor, of course, today is the one that wants to see high prices. That's the one that wants their mutual fund and pension fund to grow, because we need to look after our future lives, lean years, rainy days. But the investor actually works on a qualitative side as well. If I give you a gift, that's an investment, because I know that I've now just kind of, maybe not for you, maybe somebody else saw you giving the gift, maybe you'll pass it on, maybe it'll go around, but sooner or later, the idea will be that Andrew's a nice guy, and if he shows up at your doorstep saying, I've just been thrown out on the street and I have no money, you'll come in and you give him a meal, right? Mm-hmm. So relationships are an investment. They're a way of satisfying this investor over here. But there's a third value personae. This is the present, this is the future, and the citizen value personae is the one that looks after other people. Because these are still very self-centric, right? My needs now, my needs later. This is the one that we're relying on for other people's needs right now. And it's necessary to civilization and to society because we collaborate. That's the only way we get things done, is working together as a team. And that involves looking out for other people. If you wanted to visualize this in a very tiny, simple way, if I give you $50 right now, would you be happier spending it, or saving it, or giving it away? We all go through these three different feelings at different times. Maybe right now you want to spend it. Maybe if you're feeling very generous later on, you'd be getting more joy by giving it away. Mm-hmm. I heard somebody describe it as the 3 S jars of spend it, save it, or share it, right? So a gift economy involves sort of exercising some of that citizen value as well, in terms of going above and beyond expectations. Now, I tried to live that way for a little while. It doesn't mean entirely giving things away for free. But I go from a gift economy, I generalize that to say that a gift economy is a small part of what I call a qualitative economy, where your value is based on qualitative things. So if I give you something that is a higher quality, that's a part of a qualitative economy. If I sell you something that's a higher quality, that's also part of a qualitative economy. What we have now in our current economy is a race to the bottom. You can't buy a good quality appliance anymore. Doesn't matter how much money you spend on it, the quality of things is going down. The repairability of things is going down. The obsolescence factor is going up, because obsolescence is huge on the quantitative factor side. So in order to restore a qualitative economy, it might just be as simple as getting higher quality things. But it also means having those relationships, having businesses going locally. I'll give you a fun example. I did some renovations for someone just because they needed some help, and I'm kind of handy. And at the end of the day, they said, how much do I owe you? And I said, you pay me what you think it's worth. That was the problem. They really struggled with that because they didn't want to insult me. They didn't know what it was worth, and they were left in a bind. I had put them in a bind. And so I thought, how could I bring this into a gift economy without just giving away my time? So I gave them an invoice that was ridiculously low. And they said, oh my God, I'm not paying that much for what you did. I'm going to give you a lot more. I'm going to double that. Take it. You deserve it. So what happened there? They had an opportunity to give a gift, which made them feel wonderful. They said, oh, look at this. He said $300 for that. I'm giving him $600. Yes, I feel good. And I still feel I got a deal. I got a warm feeling because I was able to get a very decent return for what I've been doing. I don't know how much these things are worth. I don't care. It was fun doing the work. I enjoyed doing it, and I had joy from them giving me a gift. The fact that they felt they were doing a gift. All these little joy things. It's abundance. It all goes up and up and up on both sides.
It's a win-win.
It's not a zero-sum game anymore. Yeah. There are all kinds of different ways of having a qualitative economy where there's joy on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find this concept really interesting and actually very useful because I feel like nowadays it's very easy to feel conflicted about our choices as consumers, as investors even, and there's such an imbalance. You might be concerned about climate change, but you drive your car to work because you have to make a living, and
of course,
and so there's that imbalance and that hypocrisy and maybe guilt. So I find this a really useful model for understanding our values and maybe shifting them towards that much neglected.
Yeah, turn it on its side because there is travel and there's climate change, and we have to constantly go through that cycle of what's more important to me in terms of my life, my joy, my happiness, and so on. Some people get real joy out of making a solid contribution to reducing fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. Other people say, well, I've made my contribution. Now I'm going to reward myself by visiting my granddaughter, and it's a long drive to Thunder Bay, but that's important to me, mm-hmm. to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just have a couple more questions.
Sure.
We're going to open the floor to anybody else who has any other questions, whether you're on Zoom or in the room itself. So maybe in the back of your mind, think of anything you'd like to talk about. I'm just curious what you see, how you see eco-villages fitting into this, or intentional communities.
Yeah.
What role do organizations like eco-villages have to play in shifting our values away from member-based ones towards human-based?
Good question.
Ones? And as a part two to that question, how might we maximize our impact?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good question. I proposed basic income as a start, as a first step, but it turns out that there are all kinds of really interesting solutions to some of the quandaries that we are presented with, and they are well researched, well tried. They actually exist in our history. If you haven't heard of Henry George, run, don't walk to Wikipedia, look this guy up. It's amazing that not a lot more people have heard of Henry George and what he's all about. But he basically said, he came up with some really simple solutions to the way we interact with the land, the way we interact with each other, the way we consider ownership, that really address a lot of interesting problems. One of the things that happens if you base your society on a quantitative value system, and that was the one where things went up on an exponential curve, is that I said the rich always get richer and get richer faster. It's a curve that goes spiraling up. Mathematically speaking, if you were to sit down and run the math on that, the solution, the end game, would be really obvious. One entity would end up owning everything. It has to come out that way. Mike Nickerson, who's a wonderful author that people here have probably heard of. I think he wrote Life, Money, and Illusion. He used to talk about the Monopoly game. Nobody plays the Monopoly game to the end. If you actually read the rules, Monopoly is done when one person owns everything, when every other player has been eliminated and is wiped out. What we tend to do when we play Monopoly is we say, oh, okay, Justin won. He's got a lot more than all of us. We're done. It's dinner time. Let's go. Right? We're not doing that here. We're not saying, oh, okay, Jeff Bezos, you won. Amazon wins. Let's just, put all the money back in the box and we'll play it again some other day. Sooner or later, one entity has to own it all, and not just money. They have to own all the land too. Everything that we put a dollar value on and can be owned will eventually be owned by one entity. And if you think that that's still some distance off, Google Vanguard and State Street, BlackRock. Yeah. Everybody talks about the 1% or now the 0.1%. I actually talk about the 8% because that's how much BlackRock owns of just about everything. And Vanguard. For some reason, it always, you look at it, always,
Sí,
8% Coca-Cola.
es en el otro, en la otra clave,
Yeah, yeah.
en la otra SD. Es que busqué las fotos que mostré ayer.
Oh,
Yeah, the
So I
three
thought he
points
was
there.
asking.
yeah. 8% of Pepsi-Cola, 8% of Coca-Cola, 8% of all these competing things. They're all owned by this one company or this one private investment firm, if you will. And so this day is coming. So back to your question, how do we deal with this? Well, the first thing we do is we start adopting some different ways of thinking about land, for example. Because frankly, if one company owned all the money in the world, I don't consider that a problem. Why not? Because money is based on belief. So if one company, say BlackRock or Vanguard, says, finally, we own all the Bitcoin, we own all the dollars, we just say, okay, we don't believe they have any value anymore. It's gone. We'll just go out into the field and take the food because we don't care if you own it or we own it. It's here. And you can only pay these people that are your private army with money that no longer considered valuable anymore because nobody believes in it anymore. So it's done. I don't care about that. But land is something that we have a limited amount of, a very limited amount of on this planet. And how we use it and how we consider ownership of it is really important. My personal belief is that natural resources should not be ownable. It should not be possible for either a human being or a corporation to own a piece of nature. But what Henry George said was, well, in order to make the economy work, we can allow them to own anything they do on the land. You build a house, it's yours. You built it, you own it. If you farm a land and produce crops, you can sell them because that's your work, but you don't own the land. And so he came up with ways of slowly shifting our focus to where, not just shifting our focus, but actually economic ways of shifting that concept of ownership so that eventually the ownership will be returned to the people. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing in terms of your intentional living is you are showing that there is a different relationship that we can have to the land. There's a different relationship that we can have to natural objects and how we are woven into this. And in a sense, you are the keepers of this knowledge and living this lifestyle. And it's not a question of changing other people's behaviors. It's a question of slowly changing the way they think about their values, and the behaviors will follow after that. And it's a way of demonstrating to them that you are not sacrificing things to be living the way you do. You've adopted a different emphasis on human values, and you are deriving joy from that. You are living better lives by doing that. Mm-hmm. I often tell people that Stephen Covey had it right when talking to other people that have not adopted that. Seek to understand before you seek to be understood. And when you understand this model, and you understand that dollar values are over here and human values are over here, there is a reason why they see all the good stuff here. And there's a reason why you see all the good stuff over here. And there is bad sides to both. And it's a question of getting them to adopt those same things so that one side doesn't dominate your life. Because frankly, they've established that there are limits to how much money brings us happiness. It was, I think, at the last study was about $75,000 US income is where you peak at your happiness. And then additional dollars don't give you more happiness. In fact, it tends to go down after a while. Additional dollars take you down in happiness. So everyone understands happy. And it's just a matter of showing them and demonstrating to them that there are other ways of being happy. Email is a lot faster and a lot cheaper and a lot more convenient than writing a personal letter. But actually sitting down to a piece of paper and a pen and writing someone a letter, when's the last time you did that? It's huge. I had somebody contact me. They actually sent me an email, of course, but they said, you sent me a letter and I read it and then I took it on the subway because I wanted to open it in front of the whole subway car and take it out. And it was 4 pages and I was reading it and everybody in the subway car was going, oh my God, it's in ink. It's all handwritten. Oh, they are so lucky. We love that stuff. Yeah. But it is not just that it's a communication. If you've ever found a letter from your ancestors that was written by your great-grandfather to your great-grandmother and so on, that is so cool. When we give a letter to people, we are actually giving knowledge that I can't look in my sent box to see what I sent them. I can't immediately call up what those emotions were. I'm giving them away. I'm allowing them to hold on to them. It's a gift. It's part of a gift economy. And sure, it costs a little more, but what's worth more, right? It's over here. It's these human values.
Right. Yeah, it's about recognizing and remembering those values that are still there, but that are underappreciated, under-focused on.
Right.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think maybe, do we feel like it's time to open up the floor to discussion?
Sure.
I know on Zoom we have a few maybe questions that have been building up, and maybe people in the room
Stick your hand up.
some questions.
Yeah, some great discussion in the Zoom chat too. It's a bit much to read out loud, but anyone on Zoom that would like to ask a question, if you could just pop up your the little reaction bar at the bottom has a raise hand button in there and put your hand up.
Otherwise we can't see you.
Yeah, otherwise we won't see you. Maybe we'll start if there's one in the room here. Does anyone in here have a question?
We could take that off highlight too, go into gallery mode so we could see a lot more hands potentially. But the hands people will move to the top left. So we'll see them.
So if anyone in there, just press the raise hand button and
why don't we start in the room? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm John.
Hi, John.
Good to see you. I was really relating to this triangle of consumer, investor, citizen, just in my own being. It's just like it's an internal struggle to balance this triangle out, and it's shifting and changing all the time. And I'm not sure how to get it right. It seems like it keeps shifting over time from when I was younger to now the age I'm at now.
Yeah.
When I talk to other people, they're in all different. It's like there's a constant evolution and dynamic that's playing out here. And I just wonder if you could speak to that a bit.
Sure. The original getting it right. Yeah. Getting it right here is like having the exact right amount of oxygen and CO2 in your body that you don't have to breathe anymore.
Yeah.
Because life doesn't work that way. So it's a matter of recognizing that these three exist and that they will take precedence at different times. You are shopping for a new shirt, and you see that it was made in a sweatshop in Bangladesh, so you don't want that anymore. But then you see another shirt that happens to be made by a company that you have some shares in, so that'd be good. Give them some business. Or maybe you want to buy it from a local owner and pay a little bit more for it because you want to establish a relationship with that owner. So that's your investor working again, but he offers you something else that's at half price and your consumer takes over. This is a dance that we all do, and it's constant. It's just a matter of recognizing that those three are in play and being comfortable with that. Being comfortable with the fact that we do have to look after our future needs. We do have to look after our current needs, and we have to look after our fellow man. And I think that you can't avoid these three, but that there will be imbalances in some people that may deviate more to one or two out of the three, and then that becomes a problem. An even bigger problem actually is how we represent these values at the societal level. Who represents the consumer values in our economy? It's the marketplace. The marketplace is the thing that makes sure that all the prices are kept reasonable and that there's choices and things we can access. And if we don't have access to snow shovels in a particular city, the marketplace will bring snow shovels in. That's what looks after the consumer. Who looks after the investor values? The fact that prices are going up and that your investments will get more money over time. Typically, it's the corporations. Those capitalism is what ensures that there is growth for the future. Now, where's the problem? Who looks after the citizen values? Who looks after the fact that our innate values of looking after other people are represented at the societal level? It used to be the church. Church was the one that said, thou shalt give 10% of thy wealth to the church where we can spread it around to the poor people and we'll look after things and so on that way. Then after a while, it was the government. People said, well, the government's going to look after people because the government's going to have welfare programs and FDR, the New Deal and all that kind of thing. Unfortunately, now the government is living in this pocket over here. Occasionally over here too, but very rarely down here. The government is running themselves as a business. Well, that's not what the government's there for. Government is not there to be a business. The government is there to represent citizen values and also to make decisions that either of these would have trouble with. All right. So when we want to take action on climate change, individuals cannot do that alone. We need a higher entity that represents values that don't have to do with growing the economy and don't have to do with being able to have a different shirt for every hour of the day, but have to do with our survival. That's the problem we are wrestling with now. So we need that kind of representation at a higher level. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
It's a good question from the Zoom room here. I don't see anyone with their hand up. Does anybody have a question that they want to ask? Otherwise, I'll take one from the chat. There was one in the chat here. Just some comments around how, certainly creativity would go up for artists and entrepreneurs with something like universal, going back to universal basic income. But then a question, how will we pay factory workers if no one wants to work in a factory? Prices would go up, i.e. it seems who's going to do the jobs that nobody really wants to do if we're doing universal basic income?
That's right. So it's a matter of when that shift happens, we start to look at value differently and what's an essential worker changes. So for a start, it's been well established through pilot programs and everything else. They tried this in many places. There's nothing about a basic income that means people don't want to work. It gives them the option of surviving without working temporarily. But frankly, nobody wants to be in a position where they sit at home all day. We know that humans like to be productive. We've been through this now with the pandemic, even with the CERB coming in, even with money coming to us that we weren't earning. Nobody wanted to be sitting there doing nothing all day. People do like to work. How do you convince people to take on garbage collection or working in a factory if they are making the same amount of money being a basic income? Yeah, they probably won't. So we need to pay those people more. We need to pay them to recognize the essentialness of their work. So if they really are essential, we should be paying them more money and recognizing them for that. And maybe if the CEO is less essential, they should be making a little less. What we find is that more and more factory workers and so on are going to be replaced by automation. So a lot more, we see this happening all the time. There are machines that flip burgers in fast food restaurants. There are machines that are running warehouses for Amazon and all robotics, et cetera, et cetera. We are struggling right now to come up with ways of keeping people employed and happy and with a job, just so that we can pay them so that they can buy this stuff, right? So we should be really seeing under basic income, we should be seeing shorter work weeks. We should be seeing a lot less demand on people. And flip it on its head for a second. If I was to say to you, all right, you're demolishing this house, but there's all kinds of really good stuff in this house. There's all the hardware, there's all kinds of reusable light fixtures and all this kind of stuff. A lot of this wood could be reusable. What's the response we get? Yeah, I'm not going to waste my time on that because it is not worth my money to pay people to take that all apart. So when we start to revalue things, different things acquire greater value. If I tell the people that are building houses, oh, by the way, you don't own that lumber anymore, and we'd like to keep it as trees, suddenly it becomes a little more cost effective, perhaps, to look at those buildings you're pulling down and saying, how much of this can we reuse? If you start imposing resource taxes on extraction, suddenly people will start looking at recycling differently. If you start saying, as Europe has just done, in a sense, I need more of these parts to be interchangeable, I need more repairability, because you can't just go out and extract more cadmium and nickel and whatever you're using to build cell phones. You now have to make them repairable and reusable and so on. Suddenly people will be making cell phones differently. What I was talking about in Europe, Europe recently passed a law saying that all the chargers for electronic devices all have to be the same. They have to have the same plug so that you don't need a new charger with every device you buy. It's just a matter of them making that law, and boom, it happens. We could do the same here. Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems to me if we're going to do something about climate change and make a better world in many ways, how do we move from down into that citizen corner and get the government that way? Are there ways to do that?
Yes, there are a number of ways. One of the things, there's two steps. One is to sever this connection, all right, so that the election or the determination of governments is no longer income dependent, based on who has more money and who can purchase themselves a government. There's a whole bunch of ways of doing that. It's not just at election time, because frankly, the election only is a small part of it. There's all the lobbying that goes on. There's different ways of closing off some of those avenues where he who has the most money wins. The other way is to actually rebuild this connection, because frankly, the way it works right now, for instance, in, I don't know, Canada, first past the post, it's actually not just an unfair system. It's a system that from a quantitative perspective is designed to fail. Why? Okay, let's look at the classic case of an election where, let's say, if you could polarize it into one issue, here's the issue, and 34% of the people feel this way, and 66% of the people feel this way. All right. So actually, we could make it even more polarized. Let's go with I don't know, 27%. 20% of people feel this way. 80% of the people feel this way. What is going to be the decision under our democracy as to what's going to happen? Is the 80% going to defeat the 20%? Well, if it was a two-party system, maybe. But what happens when you have a lot of people over here on this side of the idea is they start coming up with a version A and a version B and a version C and a version D, because all these different minds are being applied to that one solution. So you get all kinds of different, oh no, why don't we do it E way? They're all on this side, but they're all kinds of different variations. And so you maybe have 19% behind this solution, and you have 19% over here, and you have 7% over here, and you have 12% over here, and 19, 19, 12, 7, we have to make it add up to 80. There's 3% over here on this. And suddenly none of them are able to defeat the 20% solution right here.
Splitting the vote.
Right, splitting the vote. And so that's first past the post is a very easy way of seeing this phenomenon, but it happens all the time. It happens when people are sitting in a room trying to come up with a solution. What happens is the more popular the solution is, the more variations there are to it. And often the simplest one over here, it wins the day in many different cases. All right. So it's as simple as, to my mind, saying preferential ranked ballots is a solution that you could be pushing for. Preferential ballots say this is my first choice, but this is my second choice, and this is my third. A bunch of municipalities had ranked ballots. Here's an interesting story. When the provincial government recently passed some legislation about nursing homes, saying that nursing homes would not be liable for anything that went wrong in the COVID pandemic. Right at the bottom of that piece of legislation was, oh, by the way, if your municipality, you can't have preferential ranked ballots anymore. London spent millions of dollars going with the ranked ballot system for their municipal elections. It was gone. They couldn't do it anymore. It was illegal.
It was hidden.
It was hidden. Yes. Buried at the bottom of this legislation. Why? Why would they do that? There was a whole bunch of other, I think Welch was looking at it. The only solution, the only reason I can come up with is that some government somewhere, some party decided that if people got used to ranking their ballots, they might say, well, why couldn't we do this at the provincial level or maybe even at the federal level? And we don't want that. So there you go. But the problem too is that when we're wrestling with these values, there's a great little story of how farmers in developing countries used to have their farms and crops raided by monkeys. Monkeys, our ancestors, very intelligent creatures. They would come along and they would steal crops. And so you want to stop that and you want to capture the monkeys. How do you capture a monkey? Anybody know how you capture a monkey? Especially when you with limited resources? Yes?
With a banana.
With a banana?
That was my guess.
Essentially, you're dead on.
Bait.
What you do is you get a jar and you fix it to a fixed object, or you use a termite mound or any hole, and you put a banana in the hole, or a bunch of nuts or candies, sweet things that the monkey would like. And the monkey comes along and he reaches into the hole and he grabs the banana or the sweets or the nuts. The thing is, you were smart enough to make the hole just big enough for the monkey's hand to just kind of fit in there. When they've grabbed that, they can't pull out. It's called the monkey trap. What we have done as a society, in a sense, is we have reached down into the hole and grabbed onto fossil fuels or dollar-based values or whatever it is, because we are hungry, and this is the solution to our hunger. And now we can't pull our hand back out. Maybe when we were younger, maybe when we were smaller monkeys, we could reach in and help ourselves. This is good, this is great. That's a value crisis in a sense, because the monkey knows that what he wants is in his hand, under his hunger value. That's right there, I've got it. But he's not applying the other value of freedom, right? It's not even on his radar. And the farmer comes along and the monkey sees him coming, says, I gotta get out of here, but I'm not willing to let go of this thing that I think is more important to me. And you capture yourself a monkey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Would you mind elaborate on universal income? My simple math says if we have 35 million Canadians,
Yeah.
say we give 1,000 per month.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 35 billion per month,
Right.
420 billion per year.
Where's the money going to come from?
Yes, that's
Right.
That's what I'm interested in.
Right. And this is something which has been solved by a lot of people far more into the accounting than I. They have shown where there are pockets of money, rearranging the economy around different ways that the money would be generated. What I want to communicate to you is the similarity between money and water. The reason I say that is that money is only worth something to a society if it's moving. When you read on the news that on the Weather Channel that there's going to be a huge thunderstorm, nobody questions where the water is going to come from. If you know your water cycle, you know that the water is going to come down from the sky in the thunderstorm. It's going to flow into lakes and rivers, and it's going to be taken up by evaporation, and it's going to be taken up by humans and used, and it comes around in a cycle. Nobody consumes water. We use it. Water stays water, and it goes out and it comes around again. Nobody consumes money, they use it. And if you've got a basic income and it's going to people who need the money, in this case, it would be, people below the poverty line, but also all those artists, you give them money for doing their art, they're going to spend it. They're going to instantly spend it. And so that money is going around in the economy. A basic income actually grows economies because the money is moving. So what you're doing is you're driving the economy by the money coming up from the bottom. Everybody's going to spend it almost instantly. This idea of, oh no, you can drive the economy by creating jobs. No, that money doesn't go into the lakes and rivers. That goes into private reservoirs over here. That money gets canned in bottles and is stored away to the wealthiest corporations, to the wealthiest people, and so on. That money doesn't move. That money is not doing anybody any good. This money is. So it's a whole paradigm shift. When you introduce a basic income, money does different things. Let me give you another paradigm shift just in the time we've got, which is probably one of the more bizarre ones here. But we know about this because it happened in the Great Depression. There wasn't suddenly less money, it just stopped moving. People weren't spending it. Except for one place in the world, Würgl, Austria. This mayor of this town had a real dilemma. He was in a position where nobody was spending money. Everybody was holding on to it as tight as they could because it was a Great Depression. And so the money supply went down, taxes were not being paid, people were not buying things, businesses were failing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he read an interesting article about somebody who based their work on Henry George. That name come up again, and I'll talk about it more in the book. But basically the idea was he gave away money to didn't give away, he paid his employees in money that went down in value. What it meant was it was called scrip currency or demurrage currency. If it was $1, you had to apply a stamp on the back of the dollar for it to be still worth $1 every month. And the stamp cost you 1 cent. So if you think about it, if you had a dollar bill at the end of the year and you hadn't put any stamps on it, it was worth 88 cents because you had to put 12 stamps on it to make it worth $1 again. So the value of the dollar actually went down over time. What do you think happened when he started paying people with that money? They spent it like there was no tomorrow. If I hold on to this dollar for another month, it's going to be worth 1% less. So I'm going to pay all my taxes right away. I'm going to pay for my food with this dollar. I want to get rid of it as fast as I can, as fast as I need the money, the money to do things for me. I can't buy too much food because it'll just rot, but as soon as I get it, I'll spend it. The store owners were accepting money that was going to go down in value. Why? Because it was better than nothing. And they knew that they could buy their supplies with it. Boom, out it goes. Money moving around. What's the really fascinating thing about that in terms of the diagrams I gave earlier? When money goes down in value, suddenly money is natural. Money is suddenly obeying the laws of thermodynamics and entropy to say that when things get kept and saved and stored away for a while, they start to degrade in value. That's the law of thermodynamics that says we cannot come out ahead. And so now money being an exchange for food and lumber and oil in the ground makes sense. Because now, instead of being so tempted to suck the oil out of the ground and turn it into money that does this, now money does that. And I'm thinking, whoa, wait a minute. If I leave that oil in the ground, that'll be still worth this. And it'll only start dropping in value when I turn it into money. And suddenly there's reasons to leave natural resources where they are. Any one of these ideas on its own would be ridiculous. A basic income on its own, it's a tough sell. It's a really tough sell. Do you know that 50 years ago, Richard Nixon introduced basic income to the United States, and it almost passed two votes shy in the Senate. It passed through the Congress. We could have had basic income in the United States 50 years ago. You know who was a big proponent of it? Milton Friedman. That absolute other end of the scale of libertarian. Why? Because he didn't want to see the government controlling the money. He wanted the money in the hands of the people who knew how to spend it. It's a whole value shift. Once you get a number of these things happening simultaneously, you start to see a value shift. We start thinking about money in different ways. Money is no longer something that we use to become wealthy and to become happy. Money is now just a tool. And if the government's printing up this tool so that we can have free food, in a sense, free bare necessities of shelter, makes sense. People back when universal income or universal healthcare was introduced said, "Do you know what doctors cost? Do you know what nurses cost? Look at the United States. Do you know what healthcare costs? Where is that money going to come from?" Well, suddenly, when the government started providing that, the costs weren't quite as high as they were before. Suddenly, the whole cost of healthcare took on a different dimension. And we don't question now whether we're going to feed you or you or you when you're in hospital. You're lying there with a kidney transplant, we're going to give you food. So why would we feed you for free in hospital and not feed you for free on any other day of the week or any other day of your life? Why shouldn't survival be free? Why shouldn't humans get to the point where you're not thinking about where you're going to find your next meal? You're going to think about, where can I earn some money to get a better meal? Where am I going to find a job that addresses my talents as opposed to the bare necessities that I can just to get by and feed my kids? It takes society to a different level of evolution.
Yeah, and to kind of add on to that, I see somebody brought up in the chat that you would save money from paying for other social programs.
Well, of course you would.
And it's much simpler to give this. You're just looking at income level.
Absolutely.
And you give a basic.
Absolutely. And one of the other things it does is it changes our human perspective of ourselves. There was a program, I think it was the Manitoba one or the one in California, one or the other, that I think was giving something like $75 a week. It wasn't going to buy anybody anything. But what it did was it triggered different thoughts in people's brains. The government is giving me $75 just because I'm me. Wow, maybe I have value. Maybe I should spend that money on the transit in order to get a job that I couldn't normally get to. The level of employment went up. People on the program were getting more jobs, not less. They were getting in less trouble with the law. Their health outcomes were better, simply because somebody had given them a gift. And I do not buy that the number had anything to do with it. It was simply the joy of knowing that somebody's looking after me and somebody thinks I have value. Maybe I do have value, right? I think that gifts have that potential. Yes.
Well, this has been so interesting, and we really appreciate you coming to Whole Village. It's been a great conversation.
Oh, it's a joy being here.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Andrew Welch. Once again, those books that you've written. The first one is The Value Crisis: From Dollars to Democracy: Why Numbers Are Ruining Our World. And then you've got the second one there, Our Second Chance, which just came out this year. What's the subtitle on that?
Changing Course and Solving the Value Crisis. So thevaluecrisis.com is how you find all this stuff. Thevaluecrisis.com. And
you can get the book there too?
You can get the book there. You can get the book at a number of local bookstores, certainly local here. I'm trying to get out there and get books into more places. But you can certainly order it online. The first one both of them are available on the website. So yeah.
Is that The Value Crisis?
Thevaluecrisis.com. Thevaluecrisis.com. Yeah.
That's great. Well, and
There you go.
also thank you to everyone who came here in the room
Yeah.
and everyone on Zoom as well. It's nice to have this community of like-minded individuals who are
Yeah.
also interested in these ideas. And so thanks so much to everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like this should just keep going on. It's
We
so
did.
interesting.
It
So,
probably
thank you so
will.
much. Yeah.
But we will release all these lovely faces. So much, thanks so much for showing up and for your participation in the chat.